The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust so thick Clara could taste the grit between her teeth. She pressed a gloved hand to the window frame, steadying herself as the wheels groaned one last time before settling into the hard-packed earth. Through the haze, she could make out the rough outline of buildings, wooden, weathered, leaning slightly as if the wind had been bullying them for years. This was Kettleman's Crossing. This was supposed to be her fresh start. She didn't feel fresh. She felt like something dragged backward through a bramble and left to dry. The driver's voice barked from above. "End of the line, ma'am. You're getting off here whether you like it or not." Clara gathered her skirts, dusty blue silk that had seen better days, and pushed open the door. The heat hit her first, dry and merciless, nothing like the humid summers back in Philadelphia. Then came the noise, shouting, horses neighing, and underneath it all, a low hum of tension that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She stepped down onto the street, her boots sinking slightly into the dirt, and looked around. Kettleman's Crossing was barely a town. A handful of storefronts, a saloon with a busted sign, a livery stable that smelled like manure and hay. A few people moved along the boardwalks, but they didn't look at her. They were all looking the other way, toward the center of the street. Clara turned. 3 men stood in a loose triangle, hands hovering near their hips. 2 wore badges pinned to their vests, tin stars dulled by dust and time. The 3rd man was younger, maybe 30, with a scar running down his left cheek and a smirk that suggested he wasn't afraid of much. His hand rested on the butt of his revolver like it belonged there. "Last chance, Garrett," one of the lawmen said. His voice was steady, but Clara could hear the edge in it. "Drop the gun and come quiet." The scarred man, Garrett, laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "You think I rode all the way out here just to let you drag me back to some flea-bitten jail cell? Nah, I don't think so." The other lawman shifted his weight. "You killed a man in cold blood. You're going to hang either way. Might as well make it easy on yourself." "Easy?" Garrett's smirk widened. "Nothing about this is easy, Sheriff." Clara should have moved, should have ducked into the nearest doorway, found cover, done anything other than stand there like a fool with her carpet bag in one hand and her stupid silk skirts catching the wind. But she didn't. She just stood there, frozen, watching. Garrett's hand twitched. The sheriff's gun cleared leather first, but Garrett was faster on the draw. The gunshot cracked through the air like a whip, and Clara flinched so hard she stumbled backward. Her heel caught on the edge of the boardwalk, and she went down hard, landing on her side in the dirt. Another shot, then another. She couldn't see what was happening anymore. Her vision was full of dust and panic and the sharp sting of gravel digging into her palms. Someone was shouting. Boots pounded the ground nearby. She tried to push herself up, but her arms were shaking too badly. Then a shadow fell over her. "Stay down!" A man's voice, rough and urgent. Before Clara could respond, a hand grabbed her shoulder and yanked her backward, dragging her off the street and behind a water trough. She gasped, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. "Keep your head low," the man said. He was crouched beside her, one hand still on her shoulder, the other holding a rifle. His face was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin, with eyes the color of storm clouds. He didn't look at her. He was watching the street, his jaw tight. Another gunshot rang out, followed by a wet, choking sound that made Clara's stomach lurch. "Is he—" she started, but the man cut her off. "Don't look." She looked anyway. Garrett was on the ground, clutching his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and spreading fast. One of the lawmen was down too, sprawled on his back with his hat a few feet away. The other lawman, the sheriff, was still standing, but barely. He pressed a hand to his side, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Jesus," Clara whispered. The man beside her finally glanced down at her. His expression didn't change. "You all right?" I think so." "Good. Stay put." He rose to his feet, rifle in hand, and moved toward the sheriff with the kind of calm that suggested this wasn't his first gunfight. Clara stayed where she was, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. Her hands were still shaking. Hell, her whole body was shaking. The man reached the sheriff and said something Clara couldn't hear. The sheriff nodded, wincing, and let the man take his weight. Together, they moved toward the doctor's office, a narrow building with a faded sign that read Sawbones in chipped paint. Clara sat there in the dirt, hugging her knees, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She'd been in Kettleman's Crossing for less than 5 minutes, and she'd already seen 2 men shot, maybe 3. She wasn't sure about the other lawman. This was a mistake. Coming here was a mistake, but she didn't have anywhere else to go. By the time she managed to stand, her legs felt like wet rope. She brushed the dust off her skirts, a futile effort, and picked up her carpet bag, which had landed a few feet away. The street was quieter now. A few people had emerged from the buildings, murmuring to each other in low voices. Someone was covering Garrett's body with a blanket. Clara swallowed hard and looked away. She needed to find the land office. That was why she'd come here, after all. To claim the ranch her uncle had left her, a man she'd met exactly twice in her life, both times when she was too young to remember. When the letter had arrived 3 months ago, informing her of the inheritance, she'd thought it was a joke. Or a scam. But the deed had been real, signed and notarized, and the lawyer had assured her it was legitimate. 40 acres of land in the middle of nowhere. A house, a barn, a well. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Or it would be, once she signed the papers. She asked a woman sweeping the boardwalk where the land office was, and the woman pointed to a squat building at the far end of the street. Clara thanked her and started walking, ignoring the stares that followed her. She could feel them, curious, judgmental, wary. She didn't belong here, that much was obvious. The land office smelled like tobacco and old paper. A man sat behind a desk near the window, his feet propped up, a newspaper spread across his lap. He didn't look up when Clara walked in. "Excuse me," she said. He turned a page. Clara cleared her throat. "Excuse me. I'm here about a property transfer." The man sighed, lowered the newspaper, and squinted at her. He was older, maybe 60, with thinning hair and a mustache that drooped past his chin. "Name?" "Clara Whitlock." He grunted, swung his feet off the desk, and shuffled over to a filing cabinet in the corner. After a moment of rummaging, he pulled out a folder and dropped it on the desk. "Whitlock. Yeah, I got it here. You're the niece. That's right. Your uncle died 4 months back. Heart gave out. Left you the ranch." "So I've been told." The man opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "You'll need to sign here, here, and here. Proves you're taking ownership. After that, the place is yours. Such as it is." Clara frowned. "What do you mean, such as it is?" The man gave her a look that might have been pity. "Lady, your uncle didn't exactly leave you a palace. The house is standing, barely. The barn's got holes in the roof. The well's dry half the year. And the land?" He shook his head. "It's rocky, stubborn soil. Ain't been worked in years." Clara's stomach sank. "I see. Still want it?" She hesitated. The smart thing would be to walk away. Sell the land, take whatever money she could get, and head back east. Start over somewhere civilized. But she'd burned those bridges already. There was nothing back east for her except shame and debt and a man she never wanted to see again. "Yes," she said, "I still want it." The man shrugged. "Your funeral." He handed her a pen and she signed the papers, her hand cramping slightly on the third signature. When she was done, he stamped the documents and slid them back into the folder. "Congratulations, Miss Whitlock. You're a landowner." He didn't sound congratulatory. "How do I get there?" Clara asked. "About 8 miles northwest. Follow the main road out of town till you hit the fork, then take the left path. Can't miss it. There's a busted fence post with your uncle's name carved into it." "Thank you." She turned to leave, but the man called after her. "Miss Whitlock?" She looked back. "You got supplies? Food? Water? Tools?" Clara's stomach twisted. Not yet. Better get some. General stores across the street, and if you're smart, you'll hire someone to take you out there. It's not safe for a woman alone." "I'll manage." The man gave her another look, pity mixed with doubt, and went back to his newspaper. Budget. Clara stepped out of the land office and stood on the boardwalk, staring at the street. The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the dirt. She didn't have much money left. Barely enough for supplies, let alone hiring someone to escort her. She was going to have to figure this out on her own. The general store was dim and cluttered, packed floor to ceiling with barrels, crates, and shelves full of canned goods. The man behind the counter was heavy-set, with a thick beard and suspicious eyes. He watched Clara as she moved through the aisles, picking out the essentials: flour, salt, dried beans, a tin of coffee. She added a box of matches and a small lantern. When she brought everything to the counter, the man tallied it up without a word. The total made her wince. "That all?" he asked. "For now." He wrapped the goods in brown paper and tied them with twine. As Clara counted out the coins, the door behind her opened and she heard the familiar creak of boots on wood. "Reed," the shopkeeper said, his tone warming slightly. "Didn't expect to see you back in town today." "Needed a few things," a voice replied, the same voice from earlier, the man who'd pulled her off the street. Clara turned. He was taller than she'd realized, lean and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like it hadn't seen a comb in days. He met her gaze briefly, his expression unreadable, then looked away. "You're the one who—" Clara started, but he cut her off. "You hurt?" "No, thanks to you." He nodded once, then turned his attention to the shopkeeper. "I'll take a pound of nails and a spool of wire." The shopkeeper moved to gather the items, and Clara stood there, awkwardly holding her bundle of supplies. She should say something, thank him properly, but the words stuck in her throat. Reed glanced at her again. "You staying in town?" "No," Clara said. "I'm heading out to my uncle's ranch, the Whitlock place." Reed's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough that Clara noticed. "That's 8 miles out." "So I've been told." "You planning to walk?" Clara hesitated. "I was going to see about renting a horse." Reed studied her for a long moment, and Clara had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her, every lie, every fear, every desperate hope she was clinging to. "You ever ridden before?" he asked. "Not recently." "Uh-huh." He turned back to the shopkeeper, who was setting the nails and wire on the counter. "Put her supplies on my tab. I'll take her out there." Clara blinked. "What? You'll never make it on your own. Not before dark." "I don't need—" "Yeah, you do." Reed picked up his purchases and headed for the door. "Meet me at the livery in 10 minutes, and bring your things." He was gone before Clara could argue. The shopkeeper chuckled. "Guess you got yourself an escort after all." Clara stared at the door, her mind racing. She didn't know this man, didn't owe him anything. And yet, he'd already saved her life once today. Maybe that was enough. The livery stable smelled like horse sweat and hay. Reed was already there when Clara arrived, saddling a large gray gelding with practiced efficiency. A second horse, a smaller chestnut mare, stood nearby, already tacked. "That one's for you," Reed said, nodding toward the mare. "Her name's Rosie. She's calm, won't give you trouble." Clara approached the mare cautiously, running a hand along her neck. The horse's coat was warm and smooth under her palm. "I don't have money to pay you," she said quietly. "Didn't ask for any." "Then why are you helping me?" Reed cinched the saddle on the gelding and gave the strap a final tug. "Because if I don't, you'll end up dead in a ditch somewhere. And I've seen enough dead people today." Clara flinched. Reed sighed and turned to face her. His expression softened, just a fraction. "Look, I'm not trying to scare you, but this isn't Philadelphia or New York or wherever you came from. Out here, people die for stupid reasons. Thirst, snakebite, getting lost. And you don't strike me as someone who's ready for any of that. I'm tougher than I look. Maybe. But tough doesn't mean prepared." He handed her the reins to the mare. "Come on, we're losing daylight." Clara climbed onto the horse with more difficulty than she'd expected. Her skirts tangled around her legs, and she had to hike them up just to get her foot in the stirrup. Reed didn't comment, but she caught the faint twitch of amusement at the corner of his mouth. They rode out of town in silence, the horse's hooves clopping steadily against the dirt road. The landscape stretched out around them, flat and brown and endless, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional scraggly tree. The sky was enormous, a deep burning orange as the sun sank lower. Clara's thighs were already aching. "So," Reed said after a while, breaking the silence, "what's a woman like you doing out here?" "A woman like me?" "City woman. Fancy clothes. No idea how to ride a horse." Clara bristled. "I inherited the ranch. I have every right to be here." "Didn't say you didn't. Just seems like a hell of a change." She didn't answer right away. How could she explain it? That she'd run because staying meant marrying a man who'd already proven he didn't see her as a person, just a thing to be owned. that her family had sided with him, told her she was being hysterical, ungrateful, that the only thing standing between her and a life of suffocating misery had been a letter from a lawyer about a dead uncle and a piece of land she'd never seen. "I needed a fresh start," she said finally. Reed glanced at her. "Well, you picked the right place for that. Out here, nobody cares who you were, only who you are." "And who are you?" "A rancher. Got a spread about 5 miles west of your uncle's place." "You live alone?" "Mostly." Clara waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. They rode on in silence, the only sounds the creak of leather and the rhythmic thud of hooves. The sun slipped below the horizon, and the sky turned from orange to violet to deep, velvety blue. Stars began to appear, more than Clara had ever seen in her life. She'd forgotten how beautiful the world could be when you stopped running long enough to look at it. When they finally reached the ranch, it was full dark. Reed dismounted first and lit a lantern, holding it high so Clara could see. The house was small, smaller than she'd imagined. A single-story structure with a sagging porch and windows so grimy she couldn't see through them. The barn was worse. Half the roof had caved in and the door hung crooked on its hinges. Clara's chest tightened. Reed walked toward the house and pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, protesting the movement. He stepped inside and Clara followed, her heart sinking with every step. The interior was a disaster. Dust covered everything, the floor, the furniture, the cast-iron stove in the corner. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like tattered curtains. There was a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. That was it. Clara set her carpetbag down and tried not to cry. Reed set the lantern on the table and looked around. "It's not as bad as it looks." "Yes, it is." He didn't argue. Clara sank into one of the chairs and pressed her hands to her face. She was exhausted, bone-deep, soul-crushing exhausted. And now she was sitting in a house that looked like it might collapse if she sneezed too hard. "Why did I think this would work?" she whispered. Reed didn't answer right away. He moved to the stove, crouched down, and opened the firebox. After a moment, he stood and brushed his hands off. "Stove's still good, chimney's clear. You'll be able to cook, at least." "That's something, I suppose. More than something." He crossed the room and leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Look, I'm not going to lie to you. This place needs work. A lot of work. But it's fixable. You've got a roof, 4 walls, and land. That's more than most people start with." Clara lowered her hands and looked at him. "Do you really believe that? Or are you just trying to make me feel better?" "Both." Despite herself, Clara smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was there. Reed pushed off the wall and headed for the door. "I'll bring your supplies in. You should get some rest." "Wait," Clara said, standing. "You're not leaving, are you?" "Got my own place to get back to." "But it's dark, and I don't—" She stopped, hating how small her voice sounded. "I don't know what I'm doing." Reed paused in the doorway, his back to her. For a moment, she thought he was going to leave anyway. But then he sighed and turned around. "All right," he said. "I'll stay till morning, but only because I don't feel like explaining to the sheriff why I let you freeze to death on your first night." Clara exhaled. "Thank you." Reed brought in the supplies and started a fire in the stove while Clara swept the worst of the dust off the floor. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the place feel a little less like a tomb. By the time they were done, the room had warmed up, and the firelight made the shadows less oppressive. Reed pulled one of the chairs closer to the stove and sat down, tipping his hat over his eyes. "Get some sleep, Miss Whitlock." Clara hesitated, then moved to the bed. It creaked when she sat on it, but it held. She lay down fully clothed, pulling a thin blanket over herself, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Clara closed her eyes and tried not to think about how far she was from anything resembling safety. But she was here. She'd made it this far. And tomorrow, she'd figure out the rest. Clara woke to the sound of something clattering in the kitchen area. For a disoriented moment, she forgot where she was. The unfamiliar ceiling, the rough blanket, the smell of smoke and dust. Then it all came rushing back. The ranch, Reed, the gunfight. She sat up, her body protesting every movement. Her back ached from the thin mattress, her legs were stiff from yesterday's ride, and her hands were covered in small cuts from clearing debris the night before. Reed was crouched by the stove, coaxing the fire back to life. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard her move. Coffee'll be ready in a few minutes. Clara pushed the blanket aside and stood, trying to smooth her hopelessly wrinkled dress. Her hair had come loose from its pins during the night, hanging in tangles around her shoulders. She probably looked like she'd been dragged behind a wagon. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice rough. "About 6. She'd slept maybe 4 hours. It felt like less. Reed poured water from a canteen into a battered coffee pot and set it on the stove. "There's a creek about half a mile south if you want to wash up. Water's cold, but it's clean." Clara nodded, then realized she had no idea which direction south was. Reed seemed to read her expression because he pointed toward the back window. "That way. Follow the path through the brush. You'll hear it before you see it." "Thank you." She grabbed a clean shirt from her carpet bag, the last one she had, and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, almost cold, and the sky was just beginning to lighten along the eastern horizon. The landscape looked different in the early light, less hostile somehow. The scrub brush had a silvery quality to it, and the distant hills were soft and gray. Clara found the path easily enough, a narrow trail of packed dirt winding through the sage. Her boots crunched on the gravel, and somewhere overhead, a bird called out, a harsh, unfamiliar sound. The creek was exactly where Reed said it would be, a thin ribbon of water cutting through the rocky ground. She knelt beside it, cupped her hands, and splashed her face. The cold was shocking, stealing her breath, but it woke her up faster than any coffee could. She changed her shirt quickly, shivering in the morning chill, then headed back to the house. By the time she stepped through the door, the smell of coffee filled the small room. Reed handed her a tin cup. "It's strong. Fair warning." Clara took a sip and nearly coughed. It was strong, bitter and thick, nothing like the delicate tea she used to drink back home. But it was warm, and right now, that was enough. They drank in silence for a while. Reed stood near the window, looking out at the land with the expression of someone doing calculations in his head. Clara sat at the table, cradling the cup in her hands, trying not to think about everything that needed to be done. "So," Reed said eventually, "what's your plan?" Clara blinked. "My plan? For the ranch. You can't just live here and hope it fixes itself." "I know that." "Then what are you going to do?" Clara set the cup down and looked around the room, the sagging ceiling, the cracked windows, the floor that creaked with every step. "I suppose I need to start with repairs, make the place livable." "That's a start. What about after that?" "After that?" Reed turned to face her. "Miss Whitlock, you've got 40 acres of land here. Land doesn't pay for itself. You need livestock, crops, something that brings in money. Otherwise, you'll be broke by winter." The knot in Clara's stomach tightened. She hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd been so focused on getting here, on escaping Philadelphia, that she hadn't considered what came next. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. Reed studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Here's what I'd do if I were you. First, fix the barn. You can't keep animals without shelter, and that roof won't last another storm. Second, get the well working. You're lucky the creek's close, but you can't haul water every day. Third, clear some of the land, plant something. Doesn't have to be much, just enough to feed yourself and maybe sell a little extra in town." Clara stared at him. "That sounds like months of work." "It is. I don't know how to do any of that." "Then you'll learn." Reed drained the last of his coffee and set the cup on the table. "Look, nobody's born knowing how to run a ranch. It's hard, dirty work, and most days you'll want to quit. But if you stick with it, you'll figure it out." Clara wanted to believe him. She really did. But the gap between where she was and where she needed to be felt insurmountable. "I should get going," Reed said, moving toward the door. "Got my own place to run." "Wait!" Clara stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her cup. Would you be willing to help me? I could pay you. Eventually." Reed paused, his hand on the doorframe. "I'm not looking for charity work, Miss Whitlock." "It's not charity. It's a business arrangement. You teach me what I need to know, and when I start making money, I'll pay you back. With interest." Reed turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "You don't even know if this place will make money. Then it's a gamble for both of us." He was quiet for a long time, and Clara held her breath, waiting. Finally, he sighed. "I can give you a few hours here and there, show you the basics. But I can't do the work for you. You understand that? I understand. And you'll do exactly what I tell you. No arguing, no complaining. Clara straightened her shoulders. I don't complain. Reed's mouth twitched. We'll see about that. He left shortly after, riding off on the gray gelding with a promise to return the next morning. Clara stood on the porch and watched him go, the dust from his horse's hooves hanging in the air long after he disappeared over the ridge. Then she turned and looked at her ranch, broken down, neglected, barely standing. Her ranch. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The first day was a disaster. Clara started with the house, figuring it was the most urgent problem. She swept the floors, scrubbed the windows until her arms ached, and tried to patch a hole in the wall with a piece of scrap wood she found in the barn. The wood didn't fit. She tried hammering it in anyway and ended up splitting it down the middle. By noon, she was covered in dust and splinters, and the hole in the wall was somehow bigger than before. She sat down on the porch steps and put her head in her hands. This was impossible. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't have the right tools, the right skills, the right anything. A lizard scurried across the dirt near her feet, paused to look at her with one beady eye, then disappeared into the brush. Clara laughed. A short, bitter sound. Even the wildlife thought she was hopeless. But she didn't quit. She went back inside, found a different piece of wood, and tried again. This time she measured first, cut the edges with a rusty saw she'd found in the barn, and wedged it into place. It wasn't pretty, but it held. Small victories. By the time the sun set, Clara had managed to patch 2 holes, fix one of the shutters, and clean out the stove well enough that it didn't smoke every time she lit a fire. She heated a can of beans for dinner and ate them straight from the pot, too tired to bother with a plate. Her hands were blistered, her shoulders screamed with every movement, and she was pretty sure she'd pulled something in her lower back. But the house looked a little less like a ruin. She fell asleep that night before it was fully dark, still wearing her boots. Reed showed up the next morning just after dawn, riding up to the house with a toolbox strapped to his saddle. He dismounted, tied the horse to the porch railing, and looked around. "You've been busy," he said. Clara stepped outside, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I patched some holes." "I can see that." He walked over to inspect her work, running a hand along the wood. "Not bad. A little crooked, but it'll hold." Clara wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not. Reed set the toolbox down and pulled out a hammer, some nails, and a coil of rope. "Today, we're working on the barn. That roof needs fixing before the next rain, or you'll lose the whole structure." "How do I fix a roof?" Carefully, he glanced at her. "You afraid of heights?" Clara thought about it. "I don't know. I've never been very high up." "Well, you're about to find out." The barn roof was worse up close than it had looked from the ground. Entire sections of shingles were missing, and the beams underneath were rotted through in places. Reed climbed up first, testing each foothold before putting his weight on it. Clara followed, gripping the ladder so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Don't look down!" Reed called over his shoulder. Of course, Clara immediately looked down. The ground seemed very far away. "Eyes up here," Reed said, his tone sharper. "Focus on where you're going, not where you'll fall." Clara forced herself to keep climbing. When she finally hauled herself onto the roof, her legs were shaking. Reed was already kneeling near the damaged section, prying up a rotted board with a crowbar. "Come here," he said. "I'll show you how to do this." Clara crawled over. There was no dignified way to move on a slanted roof, and crouched beside him. Reed handed her the crowbar. "Wedge it under the board, right there, then pull. Not too hard or you'll crack the beam underneath." Clara did as he instructed. The board groaned and came free with a screech of rusted nails. She set it aside and looked at Reed, waiting for the next instruction. "Good," he said. "Now do the rest of them." It took hours. Clara's arms were trembling by the time they'd removed all the damaged boards, and her knees were scraped raw from kneeling on the rough shingles. But Reed didn't let her stop. He showed her how to measure and cut new boards, how to fit them into place, how to hammer the nails in at an angle so they'd hold. "You're gonna miss," he said when she raised the hammer for the first time. "Everybody does it first. Just keep trying." She missed. The hammer glanced off the nail and slammed into the board, leaving a dent. Clara swore under her breath. "Again," Reed said. She tried again, missed again. Her hand was starting to hurt. Again. By the 10th try, she managed to drive the nail halfway in. By the 20th, she could do it without thinking. Her hands were covered in new blisters, and her shoulder felt like it was on fire, but she could hammer a nail. Reed nodded, satisfied. "You're learning." They worked until the sun was high overhead, and Clara's head was pounding from the heat. When Reed finally called a break, she nearly collapsed. "Drink," he said, handing her a canteen. Clara drank deeply, the water warm and metallic, but better than nothing. She wiped her mouth and looked at the roof. They'd replaced maybe a quarter of the damaged section. It didn't look like much. "How long is this going to take?" she asked. "A week, maybe 2. Depends on how fast you work." Clara groaned. Reed allowed himself a faint smile. "Told you it wouldn't be easy." They climbed down for lunch, hard bread and dried meat that Clara had bought at the general store. It wasn't much, but it filled the hollow ache in her stomach. They ate on the porch, watching the wind move through the scrub brush. "Where did you learn all this?" Clara asked after a while. "My father. He ran a ranch up north before he died. Taught me everything he knew." "And your mother?" Reed's expression tightened. "She left when I was 10. Decided ranch life wasn't for her." Clara wanted to ask more, but something in his tone told her to let it go. "I'm sorry," she said instead. Reed shrugged. It was a long time ago. They finished eating in silence, then went back to work. By the time the sun started to set, Clara's entire body ached, and her hands were so sore she could barely hold the hammer, but they'd finished another section of the roof. Reed packed up his tools and headed for his horse. "Same time tomorrow," he said. Clara nodded, too exhausted to speak. She watched him ride off, then dragged herself inside and collapsed onto the bed without even bothering to eat dinner. Sleep took her the moment her head hit the pillow. The days started to blur together. Wake up at dawn, work until her body gave out, collapse into bed, and do it all again the next day. Slowly, painfully, the ranch began to take shape. The barn roof was repaired, the well was cleared and deepened, and Reed showed her how to prime the pump until water, rusty at first, then clear, came gushing out. Clara learned to swing an axe without hitting her own leg. She learned to mend a fence, to dig post holes that were deep enough to hold, to recognize the difference between soil that would grow something and soil that was just dust waiting to blow away. Her hands stopped bleeding after the first week. Calluses formed, thick and rough, and the blisters underneath healed into tough skin. Her shoulders broadened, her arms grew stronger, and the softness she'd carried from her old life burned away under the relentless sun. She stopped wearing gloves. They just got in the way. Reed came every morning like clockwork and stayed for a few hours. He didn't talk much while they worked, but Clara learned to read his silences. A grunt meant she was doing something right. A long pause meant she was about to make a mistake. And the rare nod of approval felt better than any compliment she'd ever received in a Philadelphia drawing room. One morning, about 3 weeks after she'd arrived, Clara was carrying a bucket of water from the well when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up, expecting to see Reed, but it was a different rider, a younger man, maybe 25, with sandy hair and a badge pinned to his vest. He reined in his horse near the porch and tipped his hat. "Morning, ma'am. You Clara Whitlock?" "I am." "Deputy Warren, just checking in on the new folks in the area. Make sure everything's all right." Clara set the bucket down and wiped her hands on her skirt. "Everything's fine. Thank you." Warren glanced around the property, taking in the repaired barn, the cleared land, the neat stack of firewood near the house. "Looks like you've been busy." "Trying to be." "That's good. Good to see someone making use of this place." He shifted in the saddle. "You got any trouble out here? Strangers poking around? Anything like that?" Clara frowned. "No. Should I be worried about that?" Warren hesitated. "There's been some incidents. Cattle rustling, mostly. A couple of ranches got hit last month. We think it's the same group that Garrett was running with." The name sent a chill down Clara's spine. "I thought Garrett was dead." "He is, but he had partners. They're still out there." "Have they come this way?" "Not yet, but it doesn't hurt to be careful." Warren touched the brim of his hat again. "You got a gun, Miss Whitlock?" Clara shook her head. "Might want to get one, just in case." He turned his horse toward the road. "You need anything? You can find me in town. Sheriff's office." "Thank you, Deputy." He rode off, and Clara stood there for a long time, staring after him. The idea of outlaws prowling around her property made her stomach turn. She'd come here to escape danger, not walk straight into more of it. When Reed arrived an hour later, she told him about the deputy's visit. Reed's jaw tightened. He's right. You should have a gun. I don't know how to shoot. Then I'll teach you. The next day, Reed brought an old rifle, a Winchester, he called it, and a box of ammunition. They set up targets near the edge of the property, tin cans balanced on fence posts. Reed showed her how to load the rifle, how to hold it against her shoulder, how to line up the sights. Don't jerk the trigger, he said. Squeeze it, slow and steady. Clara took a breath, aimed at the first can, and squeezed. The rifle kicked hard, slamming into her shoulder, and the shot went wide, kicking up dust a few feet to the left of the target. You flinched, Reed said. It's loud. It's supposed to be loud. Try again. She tried again, and again, and again. By the time the box of ammunition was half empty, she'd managed to hit one can. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Reed nodded. Keep practicing. Every day, if you can spare the ammunition. Clara rubbed her sore shoulder. Do you really think they'll come here? I don't know. But if they do, you need to be ready. That night, Clara kept the rifle beside her bed, loaded and within reach. She didn't sleep well. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside made her heart race. But nothing happened. The night passed quietly, and when dawn came, Clara got up and went back to work. A few days later, Reed brought her something unexpected. 3 chickens in a wooden crate, squawking and flapping their wings. What are these for? Clara asked, staring at them. Eggs. Fresh eggs every morning, if you take care of them right. He set the crate down near the barn. They'll need a coop. I'll help you build one. They spent the afternoon constructing a small enclosure out of scrap wood and chicken wire. It wasn't pretty, but it was sturdy, with a little roof to keep the rain off and a nesting box inside. Clara watched the chickens strut around their new home, pecking at the ground, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. It was the first time since she'd arrived that the ranch felt like more than just a place to survive. It felt like a home. Thank you, she said quietly. Reed shrugged. Don't thank me yet. Chickens are a pain in the neck. They'll get into everything if you let them. But Clara could see the faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. That evening, after Reed left, Clara sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the hills. The chickens clucked softly in their coop, settling in for the night. The air was cool, and for the first time in weeks, Clara felt something close to peace. She was exhausted, filthy, and her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. But she was still here, still standing. The next morning, she found 3 small eggs in the nesting box. She carried them inside like they were made of glass and cooked them slowly in the cast-iron skillet. They were the best eggs she'd ever tasted. Reed arrived just as she was finishing breakfast. He glanced at the empty plate and raised an eyebrow. The chickens working out? They're perfect. Good. He set his toolbox down. Today, we're planting. Clara blinked. Planting what? Vegetables. Potatoes, beans, squash, things that'll grow in this soil. You can't live on eggs alone. They spent the morning turning over a section of land near the house, breaking up the hard-packed earth with a hoe and a rake. It was brutal work. The ground fought them every step of the way, full of rocks and roots and soil so dry it turned to dust under their hands. But Clara didn't complain. She swung the hoe until her hands blistered all over again, until sweat poured down her face and her back screamed for mercy. And when the earth was finally turned, Reed showed her how to plant the seeds. Not too deep, not too shallow, spaced just far enough apart. Water them every day, he said, morning and evening if it doesn't rain. And keep an eye out for rabbits. They'll dig up the whole garden if you let them. Clara nodded, wiping dirt from her forehead. Anything else? Yeah, don't get discouraged if some of them don't make it. First-time gardens are always rough. But Clara was determined. She watered the garden every morning and every evening, carrying bucket after bucket from the well until her arms felt like they'd fall off. She chased away rabbits, pulled weeds, and watched the soil like it held the secrets to the universe. And after 2 weeks, she saw the first green shoots pushing through the dirt. She was so excited she nearly cried. Reed came by that afternoon and crouched beside the garden, inspecting the tiny plants. Not bad, he said. You might actually have a knack for this. Clara beamed. You think so? Don't let it go to your head. They're not full grown yet. But Clara didn't care. She had plants. real living plants that she'd grown herself. It felt like a miracle. The weeks continued to pass, and the ranch slowly transformed. The barn was solid now, the roof patched and the doors repaired. The garden grew, green and lush, fed by Clara's stubborn determination and the water she hauled every day. The chickens laid eggs like clockwork, and Clara even managed to sell a few dozen in town, earning her first bit of real money since she'd arrived. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Reed still came by most mornings, though less often now. Clara didn't need as much help anymore. She'd learned to swing a hammer without smashing her thumb, to mend a fence post, to recognize when a storm was coming by the way the air smelled. She was becoming something she'd never been before, self-sufficient. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Reed sat on the porch steps beside her, watching the light fade. They'd just finished reinforcing the chicken coop after a coyote had tried to break in the night before. "You've come a long way," Reed said after a while. Clara looked at him, surprised. He wasn't one for compliments. "You think so?" "I know so. When you got here, you couldn't even saddle a horse. Now look at you." Clara glanced down at her hands, rough, calloused, dirt under the nails. She barely recognized them. "I had a good teacher." Reed was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You did the work. I just pointed you in the right direction." They sat in silence for a while, and Clara realized she didn't mind it. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was easy, familiar. "Reed," she said eventually, "why did you help me?" He didn't answer right away. He took off his hat, turned it over in his hands. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe because you reminded me of someone." "Who?" "Me. A long time ago." He set the hat back on his head. "When my father died, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was 17, stubborn as a mule, and too proud to ask for help. Nearly lost the ranch because of it." "What changed?" "A neighbor took pity on me, showed me the ropes, same way I'm doing for you. Told me that pride's a luxury you can't afford when you're trying to survive." He looked at her. "I guess I figured I owed it forward." Clara's chest tightened. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Reed nodded once, then stood. "I should get going. Got an early start tomorrow." Clara walked him to his horse. As he swung into the saddle, she said, "Reed?" He looked down at her. "Will you keep coming by, even when I don't need the help anymore?" Something shifted in his expression, softened, just a little. "Yeah," he said. "I'll keep coming by." He rode off into the gathering darkness, and Clara stood there, watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then she went inside, lit the lantern, and made herself a simple dinner. She ate slowly, savoring the quiet, and when she was done, she sat at the table and looked around the little house. It wasn't much. The walls were still crooked, the floor still creaked, and there were 100 things that needed fixing. But it was hers. She'd built this. Not perfectly, not easily, but she'd done it. And tomorrow, she'd do it again. The first frost came in late October, coating the ground in a thin layer of white that melted by mid-morning. Clara woke to find the chickens huddled together in their coop, refusing to come out. She coaxed them with handfuls of grain, her breath visible in the cold air, and wondered how much worse it would get. Reed arrived that afternoon with a wagon load of firewood. He didn't say anything, just started stacking it against the side of the house in neat rows. Clara came out to help, and they worked in silence until the wagon was empty. "Winter's coming early this year," Reed said, brushing bark from his hands. "You'll want to stock up on supplies. Once the snow hits, you won't be getting to town for weeks at a time." Clara's stomach dropped. "Weeks?" "Maybe longer, depending on how bad it gets." He looked at her seriously. "You got enough food? Enough fuel?" Clara mentally inventoried what she had. Flour, beans, a few cans of vegetables. It wouldn't last a month, let alone a whole winter. "I'll need to go to town. I'll take you tomorrow. We'll load up the wagon." They rode into Kettleman's Crossing the next morning, the wagon rattling behind them. The town was busier than Clara had seen it before, everyone rushing to prepare for the coming cold. The general store was packed with people buying up sacks of flour, salt pork, kerosene, anything that would keep. Clara moved through the aisles with a list she'd written the night before, trying to calculate how much she could afford. Every item felt like a gamble. Buy too much, and she'd run out of money. Buy too little, and she'd starve. Reed appeared at her elbow as she was debating between two different sizes of coffee tins. "Get the bigger one," he said. "You'll regret it if you don't. It's twice the price, and it'll last twice as long." Clara bit her lip, then grabbed the larger tin and added it to her pile. Reed helped her carry everything to the counter, where the shopkeeper tallied up the total with agonizing slowness. When he finally announced the price, Clara's heart sank. It was more than she'd expected, almost everything she had left. She counted out the coins carefully, her hands trembling slightly, and handed them over. The shopkeeper swept them into his cash box and wrapped her purchases in brown paper. As they loaded the wagon outside, Clara tried not to think about the fact that she now had less than $5 to her name. $5 between her and destitution. The weight of it pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. Reed seemed to sense her mood. "You'll make it through," he said quietly. "It's always tight the first year." "What if it's not enough?" "Then you make do with what you have. That's what everybody does out here." They were securing the last bundle when Clara heard a familiar voice. "Well, if it isn't Miss Whitlock." She turned to see Deputy Warren walking toward them, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. He tipped his hat. "How's the ranch treating you?" "Well enough," Clara said. "We're just stocking up for winter." Warren's expression grew serious. "Smart. You hear about the Hendersons?" Clara shook her head. "Their place got hit 3 nights ago. Rustlers took half their cattle, burned down their feed barn. They're lucky they weren't inside when it happened." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "The Hendersons? That's only a few miles from my property, isn't it?" "About 6, yeah." Warren shifted his weight. "Look, I don't want to scare you, but these men are getting bolder. They know winter's coming, and they're trying to grab what they can before the snow locks everything down." Reed's jaw tightened. "You got a description?" 3 men on horseback. One of them's got a burned hand, scarred up pretty bad. That's the best we got." Warren looked at Clara. "You still alone out there?" "Yes." "Might want to think about staying in town until we catch them." Clara straightened her spine. "I'm not leaving my ranch." Warren sighed. "I figured you'd say that. Just keep that rifle close, all right? And if you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you ride straight to town and find me." He tipped his hat again and walked off. Clara stood there, her hands clenched into fists, trying to control the fear clawing at her chest. Reed finished tying down the supplies and climbed onto the wagon seat. "Come on, let's get you home." They rode in silence for the first few miles. Clara kept scanning the horizon, half expecting to see riders appear at any moment. Every shadow looked like a threat, every sound like danger. "You're thinking too hard," Reed said. "Someone has to." "Thinking won't stop them if they decide to come. Being prepared will." He glanced at her. "How's your shooting?" "Better than it was. Still not great. We'll practice more when we get back, and I'm going to show you how to set up a perimeter. Noisemakers, tripwires, things that'll warn you if someone's coming." "You think they'll come to my place?" Reed was quiet for a moment. "I think you're a woman alone on a small ranch. That makes you an easy target. Whether they come or not depends on how desperate they are." It wasn't the reassurance Clara had been hoping for, but it was honest. She appreciated that, even as it made her stomach churn. When they reached the ranch, Reed helped her unload the supplies and carry them inside. Then he spent the next hour showing her how to rig a series of tin cans on wire around the perimeter of the property. The cans were filled with pebbles, and the slightest disturbance would set them rattling. "It's not foolproof," Reed said as they strung the last wire, "but it'll give you warning. That's half the battle." They practiced shooting until the sun started to set, Clara firing at targets until her ears rang and her shoulder was bruised. She was getting better, hitting the targets more often than not, but she still hesitated before pulling the trigger, and that hesitation could get her killed. "You're overthinking it," Reed said. "When the moment comes, you won't have time to think. You'll just do it." "How do you know?" "Because that's how it works. Fear makes you faster, not slower." Clara wanted to believe him, but the idea of actually shooting another person made her sick. Reed left just before dark, promising to come by the next day. Clara locked the door behind him, something she'd started doing recently, and sat at the table with the rifle across her lap. She tried to eat dinner, but the food tasted like sawdust. Eventually she gave up and just sat there, listening to the wind outside. The tin cans rattled once, and Clara nearly jumped out of her skin. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, her heart pounding. but it was just the wind shaking the wires. Nothing else. She didn't sleep much that night. The next few days passed in a blur of tension. Clara went about her work, feeding the chickens, tending the garden, hauling water, but her nerves were stretched tight. Every noise made her jump. Every shadow made her reach for the rifle. Reed came by as promised, and they spent hours reinforcing the barn doors and checking the fences for weak spots. He brought her a box of extra ammunition and made her promise to keep it somewhere accessible. "If trouble comes, don't try to be a hero," he said. "Fire a warning shot, and if they don't leave, aim for the center of mass. Don't hesitate." "I'm not sure I can do that." Reed looked at her steadily. "Then you better hope it doesn't come to that, because if it does, hesitating will get you killed." That night, Clara lay in bed with the rifle beside her, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Philadelphia, about the life she'd left behind. It had been suffocating, full of rules and expectations, and men who thought they owned her. But at least it had been safe. Out here, she was free. But freedom came with a price. She must have dozed off eventually because she woke with a start to the sound of the tin cans rattling. Not the gentle shake of the wind. This was violent, sustained. Someone was out there. Clara sat up, her heart in her throat. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, staying low. The moon was bright enough that she could see the yard, the barn, the chicken coop. Nothing moved. Then she saw them. 3 figures on horseback, silhouetted against the moonlight. They were moving slowly, cautiously, staying close to the tree line. One of them gestured toward the barn. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the rifle. She took a deep breath, trying to remember everything Reed had taught her. Warning shot first. Aim high. Make noise. She moved to the door, unlocked it as quietly as she could, and stepped onto the porch. The cold air bit at her face, but she barely felt it. She raised the rifle, aimed at the sky, and fired. The gunshot cracked through the night like thunder. The horses reared and the men shouted in alarm. Clara worked the lever, chambering another round, and fired again. "Get off my land," she yelled, her voice raw. "I'll shoot the next one at you, not over you." For a long moment, nothing happened. The men sat on their horses, frozen. Then one of them laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that made Clara's blood run cold. "That's a big threat for a little lady," the man called back. Even from a distance, Clara could hear the sneer in his voice. "You even know how to use that thing?" Clara aimed at the ground in front of his horse and fired. The bullet kicked up dirt, and the horse danced backward, whinnying. The man cursed. "Next one's through your chest," Clara said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Try me." The men conferred in low voices. Clara kept the rifle trained on them, her finger on the trigger. Her heart was beating so hard she thought they might be able to hear it. Finally, one of the men, not the one who'd spoken, raised a hand. "We don't want trouble," he said. "We're just passing through." "Then keep passing." They turned their horses and rode off slowly, disappearing into the darkness beyond the trees. Clara stood on the porch, rifle still raised, until she couldn't hear the hoofbeats anymore. Then she backed into the house, slammed the door, and locked it. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. They'd come, and she'd sent them away. But she knew they might come back. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. She sat at the table with the rifle across her lap, jumping at every sound. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray, she felt like she'd aged a decade. Reed showed up an hour later. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" Clara told him everything. When she finished, Reed's expression was grim. "You did the right thing, but they'll be back. Men like that don't like being chased off by a woman. It makes them look weak." "What do I do?" "You don't stay here alone tonight. Pack a bag. You're coming to my place." Clara wanted to argue, but the truth was, she was terrified. The thought of spending another night alone, waiting for them to return, made her feel sick. "All right," she said quietly. They spent the morning securing the ranch as best they could. Reed showed her how to bar the doors from the inside in a way that would be hard to break, and they moved anything valuable into the house where it would be harder to steal. Then they rode to Reed's ranch, Clara's rifle slung across her back. Reed's property was bigger than hers, with a solid house and a barn that didn't look like it was held together by hope and rust. He showed her to a small room with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over the hills. "You'll be safe here," he said. I'll keep watch tonight. Clara set her bag down and turned to face him. Thank you. I know I keep saying that, but I mean it. Reed shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. You don't have to keep thanking me. Yes, I do. You didn't have to help me. You could have left me to figure it all out on my own. And watch you fail? Where's the fun in that? Clara smiled despite everything. Is that what this is? Entertainment? Something like that. But his tone was softer than his words. They ate dinner together that night. Venison stew that Reed had made in a big cast iron pot. It was simple, but it was the best meal Clara had eaten in weeks. They sat at his table, and for the first time in days, she felt something close to relaxed. How long have you been out here? Clara asked. On your own, I mean. 7 years, since my father died. That's a long time to be alone. Reed shrugged. I'm used to it. Doesn't mean you have to like it. He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. No, I guess it doesn't. They talked late into the night, longer than Clara had talked to anyone in months. Reed told her about his father, about the ranch, about the mistakes he'd made when he was younger. Clara found herself telling him about Philadelphia, about her family, about the man she'd been expected to marry. He was charming at first, she said, staring into her coffee. Everyone loved him. My parents thought I was lucky to have caught his attention. But behind closed doors, he was different, controlling, mean. He wanted to own me, not marry me. Reed's jaw tightened. What happened? I refused. Broke off the engagement a week before the wedding. My family was furious, said I was ruining my life, throwing away my future. My mother stopped speaking to me. Clara laughed bitterly. Turns out she was right about one thing. I did throw away my future, just not in the way she meant. You didn't throw it away. You chose a different one. A harder one. Maybe, but it's yours. Clara looked at him, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition. They were both running from something, both trying to build something out of nothing. You should get some sleep, Reed said eventually. I'll keep watch. Clara wanted to protest, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a weight. She nodded and headed to the small room. She lay down on the narrow bed, still fully dressed, and closed her eyes. For the first time in days, she slept without nightmares. The next morning, Clara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She stumbled out of the room to find Reed at the stove cooking breakfast. He glanced over his shoulder. Morning. You look like you actually slept. I did. Clara sat at the table, feeling more human than she had in a while. Thank you for letting me stay. You can stay as long as you need to, but I figure you'll want to get back to your place sooner or later. Clara nodded. The ranch was her responsibility. She couldn't hide here forever. I'll go back this afternoon, check on things. I'll come with you. They rode out after breakfast, taking the long route so they could approach Clara's property from the hills above. Reed wanted to make sure the men hadn't come back during the night. As they crested the ridge, Clara's heart sank. Smoke was rising from the direction of her ranch, thin and gray, but unmistakable. No, she breathed. Reed kicked his horse into a gallop, and Clara followed, her stomach twisting with dread. They thundered down the slope, and as the ranch came into view, Clara saw the damage. The chicken coop was burning. Not a raging fire, but smoldering, the wood charred and blackened. The chickens were gone, either dead or scattered. The garden had been trampled, the young plants torn up and strewn across the dirt. And on the side of the barn, someone had painted a message in crude, dripping letters. Leave or burn. Clara dismounted before her horse had fully stopped and ran toward the coop. Reed grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Don't. It's still hot. The chickens. They're gone, Clara. She turned to look at him, and the sympathy in his eyes broke something inside her. She sank to her knees in the dirt, staring at the ruins of the coop she'd built, the garden she'd tended, the fragile life she'd been trying to create. They'd destroyed it, just like that. Reed crouched beside her. We can fix this. Can we? Clara's voice was hollow. They'll just come back and destroy it again. Then we'll fix it again, and again if we have to. Why? What's the point? Reed took her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. The point is that this is your land, your home, and if you let them chase you off, they win. Is that what you want? Clara wiped at her eyes angrily. No. Then get up. She got up. They spent the rest of the day salvaging what they could. The coop was a total loss, but the barn was intact, and most of the house was untouched. Clara found 2 of the chickens hiding in the brush, terrified and ruffled, but alive. She coaxed them out and put them in a makeshift pen inside the barn. Reed helped her replant the garden, working in grim silence. When they were done, he stood and looked at the message on the barn. "We need to go to town. Tell the sheriff what happened." Clara shook her head. "What's he going to do? They're already looking for these men. One more crime won't make a difference." "It'll make a difference to the law, and it'll make a difference to you. This needs to be on record." Reluctantly, Clara agreed. They rode to Kettleman's Crossing and found Deputy Warren at the sheriff's office. He listened to their story with a deepening frown, taking notes in a battered ledger. "I'll add it to the report," Warren said, "but I'm not going to lie to you, Miss Whitlock. We're stretched thin as it is. Unless we catch them in the act, there's not much we can do." "So I'm just supposed to wait for them to burn my house down with me in it?" Warren's expression was pained. "I didn't say that. I'm saying we're doing everything we can. But you might want to consider relocating until this is over." "I'm not leaving." "Then you better be ready to defend yourself, because these men don't quit easy." They left the sheriff's office, and Clara felt the weight of helplessness settling over her like a blanket. Reed walked beside her in silence until they reached the horses. "You're not staying at the ranch tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. "Reed, I mean it, Clara. You're coming back to my place. We'll figure out a plan, but you're not staying there alone." Clara wanted to argue, but she was too tired, too scared. "All right." They rode back to Reed's ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Clara felt numb, like she was watching everything from a distance. That night she sat on Reed's porch and stared out at the darkening hills. Reed joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "I thought I could do this," Clara said quietly. "I thought if I worked hard enough, if I learned fast enough, I could make it work. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe this place is too much for me." Reed was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you're tougher than you give yourself credit for. You've been out here for what, 2 months? And in that time, you fixed a house, built a coop, planted a garden, learned to shoot. Most people wouldn't have made it past the first week. And now it's all falling apart. So you build it again. That's what you do out here. You build, it breaks, you build again, over and over until it sticks." Clara looked at him. "Why do you care so much? Why does it matter to you if I succeed or fail?" Reed met her gaze, and for once, he didn't look away. "Because I've been where you are. Alone, scared, ready to give up, and nobody helped me. I had to figure it all out on my own, and it nearly killed me. I don't want that for you." "Is that the only reason?" Reed's jaw worked, like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Finally he sighed. "No, it's not." The air between them felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. Clara's heart was beating faster, and she didn't know if it was fear or something else entirely. Before she could say anything, Reed stood abruptly. "I should check on the horses. You should get some rest." He walked off into the darkness, leaving Clara alone on the porch. She sat there for a long time, thinking about what he'd said. About toughness and resilience and building things over and over until they stuck. About the way he'd looked at her when he said, "It's not the only reason." Something had shifted between them. Clara wasn't sure what it was, but she could feel it, fragile and new and terrifying. She went inside eventually and lay down on the narrow bed. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep and dreamless. The next morning, Reed had a plan. "We're going to set a trap," he said over breakfast. "These men want you scared and alone, so we're going to make them think that's what they're getting, but we'll be waiting. You want to use me as bait? I want to catch them before they do any more damage, and the only way to do that is to give them what they think they want." Clara's stomach churned, but she nodded. "What do I have to do?" They spent the day preparing. Reed brought supplies from his ranch and helped Clara set up what looked like a normal evening routine. Lights in the windows, smoke from the chimney, but hidden in the barn, Reed waited with his rifle. And Clara, inside the house, kept her own rifle loaded and ready. The sun set, the stars came out, and they waited. Hours passed. Clara's nerves were wound so tight she thought she might snap. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside sent her heart racing. Then just after midnight she heard it. Hoofbeats. Slow and deliberate. Clara moved to the window and peeked through the gap in the curtains. 3 riders, just like before. They stopped at the edge of the property, conferring in low voices. Then they dismounted and started walking toward the house. Clara's breath came in short, shallow gasps. She gripped the rifle tighter, her palms slick with sweat. The men reached the porch. One of them tried the door, locked. He muttered something to the others, then pulled out a knife and started working at the latch. Clara stepped back, raising the rifle. This was it. The moment Reed had warned her about. No time to think, just act. The door splintered open, and the man stepped inside. Clara fired. The shot went wide, splintering the doorframe inches from the man's head. He threw himself backward with a shout, stumbling off the porch. Clara worked the lever, chambering another round, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped the rifle. "There's someone inside," the man yelled to his companions. "She's armed." More gunfire erupted, not from Clara, but from the barn. Reed's rifle cracked twice in quick succession, and one of the men went down with a scream. The other 2 scattered, running for cover behind the water trough. Clara pressed herself against the wall beside the window, her heart hammering. She could hear the men shouting, boots scraping against dirt, the metallic click of hammers being cocked. Another shot from Reed, and wood exploded from the trough. "You're surrounded," Reed's voice carried across the yard, hard and commanding. "Throw down your weapons and get on the ground, or the next shot goes through your skull." For a moment, there was silence. Then one of the men laughed, that same ugly sound Clara had heard before. "You think we're scared of you, old man? There's 2 of us and 1 of you." "3 of us," Clara called out before she could stop herself. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "And I already know I can shoot. Question is whether you want to find out how good my aim's gotten." Another pause. Clara could hear them whispering urgently to each other. She risked a glance through the window and saw them crouched behind the trough, weighing their options. The man Reed had shot was lying motionless in the dirt, a dark stain spreading beneath him. Clara's stomach turned, but she forced herself to look away. "Focus. Stay sharp." "We don't want trouble," one of the men finally called out. Not the one who'd laughed. The other one. His voice was younger, uncertain. "We're just trying to survive, same as you." "By burning down people's homes?" Reed shot back. "That what you call surviving?" "We got families to feed, winter's coming, and—" "Shut up, Tommy," the other man hissed. But Tommy kept talking, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Look, we didn't want to hurt nobody. Pike said it'd be easy, said we'd just scare some folks, take what we needed. But it's gotten out of hand and I'm done with it. I'm putting my gun down." "Don't you dare," the other man snarled. "I ain't dying for this, Cole. I got a wife and a baby coming." Movement near the trough. Tommy slowly rising, hands raised, a revolver dangling from one finger. "I'm done!" Cole erupted from behind the trough with a roar, tackling Tommy to the ground. They struggled, rolling in the dirt, and the gun went skittering away. Reed was out of the barn in seconds, rifle trained on them. "Break it up," Reed barked. "Now!" Cole threw a wild punch that connected with Tommy's jaw, then scrambled for the fallen revolver. Reed fired, not at Cole, but at the ground in front of him. Dirt exploded, and Cole froze. "Next one's not a warning," Reed said quietly. "Step away from the gun." Cole's face twisted with rage, but he raised his hand slowly. Tommy pushed himself upright, blood streaming from his nose, and backed away from his former partner. Clara emerged from the house, rifle still raised, her legs unsteady. The man Reed had shot earlier wasn't moving at all. She tried not to look at him, tried not to think about the fact that someone was dead in her front yard. "Clara, get some rope from the barn," Reed said without taking his eyes off the two men. "We're tying these boys up and taking them to town." Clara found the rope with shaking hands and brought it to Reed. He kept his rifle trained on Cole while directing Clara to tie Tommy's hands first. The young man didn't resist, just stood there looking defeated. Cole was a different story. When Clara approached with the rope, he spat at her feet. "You think you're tough. You're just a scared little city girl playing rancher. This ain't over." Reed slammed the rifle butt into Cole's stomach. The man doubled over with a wheeze, and Reed shoved him to the ground, pressing a boot between his shoulder blades. "One more word and I'll make sure you never speak again. You understand me?" Cole gasped something that might have been yes. They got both men bound and loaded onto their own horses, hands tied to the saddle horns. The dead man, Pike, Clara assumed, They wrapped in a tarp and secured across his horse. Clara tried not to look at the shape under the canvas. Reed rode alongside the prisoners while Clara followed behind, her rifle across her lap just in case. The ride to town felt endless, every shadow making her jump, every sound putting her on edge. By the time they reached Kettleman's Crossing, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Deputy Warren was just unlocking the sheriff's office when they arrived. He took one look at the group and his expression hardened. What happened? Reed dismounted and started untying Cole. These two and their friend broke into Miss Whitlock's ranch last night. Friend didn't make it. These two are all yours. Warren grabbed Cole roughly and hauled him inside, locking him in one of the cells. Tommy went quietly, his head hanging low. When both men were secured, Warren came back out and looked at the body still draped over the horse. "That's Pike Garrison," he said grimly. "We've been after him for months." "Who shot him?" "I did," Reed said. Warren studied Reed for a long moment, then nodded. "Self-defense, clear as day. I'll need statements from both of you, but I don't see this going anywhere beyond that." He looked at Clara. "You all right, Miss Whitlock?" Clara wasn't sure how to answer that. Was she all right? She'd just watched a man die, shot at another man herself. Her hands were still shaking, and she felt like she might throw up at any moment. But she was alive. Her ranch was still standing. "I will be," she said. They spent the next hour giving their statements, going over every detail of what had happened. By the time they finished, the sun was fully up, and the town was starting to wake. People on the street stared at Clara and Reed as they left the sheriff's office, whispers following them like smoke. Clara didn't care. She was too tired to care. They rode back to her ranch in silence. When they arrived, Clara dismounted and stood in the yard, looking at the damage. The splintered door, the trampled garden, the blood stain near the porch that she'd have to scrub away. Reed came to stand beside her. "You did good last night." Clara let out a shaky laugh. "I missed." "You stood your ground. That's what matters." "I almost killed someone, but you didn't, and the ones who deserved it are locked up or dead." Reed turned to face her. "You're safe now. That's what matters." Safe. The word felt foreign. Clara didn't think she'd ever feel truly safe again. But maybe that was the price of freedom. Maybe safety was something you had to fight for every single day. "Help me fix the door?" she asked. Reed nodded. "Yeah, let's get to work." They spent the morning making repairs, working side by side in the comfortable silence that had developed between them. By noon, the door was rehung, the garden replanted, and the blood-stain scrubbed away. Clara made coffee and they sat on the porch, exhausted but satisfied. "I need to rebuild the chicken coop," Clara said, staring at the charred remains. "The hens won't last much longer without proper shelter." "We'll do it tomorrow. You need rest first." Clara wanted to argue, but he was right. She was running on fumes, adrenaline and stubbornness the only things keeping her upright. "Will you stay? Tonight, I mean. I don't think I can—" She stopped, hating how weak she sounded. "I'll stay," Reed said quietly, "as long as you need me to." That night, Reed slept on the floor near the stove while Clara took the bed. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the moment Pike had come through the door, the weight of the rifle in her hands, the deafening crack of the shot, the way he'd fallen. She'd been prepared to kill him. If her aim had been better, she would have. The thought should have horrified her. Instead, it just made her feel hollow. Somewhere in the darkest hours before dawn, she finally fell asleep. When she woke, Reed was already up, coffee brewing on the stove. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Morning," he said, handing her a cup. "Did you sleep?" "Enough." Clara doubted that, but she didn't press. They drank their coffee and ate a simple breakfast of bread and jam, then got to work on the new chicken coop. Reed had brought lumber from his own supplies, refusing Clara's protests about payment. "Consider it an investment," he said. "Those eggs are the best I've had in years." They worked through the day, measuring and cutting and hammering. Clara's arms ached and her back screamed, but she didn't stop. The coop took shape slowly, stronger and sturdier than the first one had been. Reed showed her how to reinforce the corners, how to angle the roof so rain would run off instead of pooling. By evening, it was finished. They moved the two surviving hens inside, and the birds immediately began exploring their new home, clucking softly. Clara stood back and surveyed their work. It wasn't perfect. One wall was slightly crooked, and the door didn't hang quite straight, but it was solid. It would protect the chickens through the winter. Not bad for a day's work, Reed said. Clara smiled. We make a good team. Something flickered across Reed's face, too quick for Clara to identify. Yeah, he said softly. We do. The days began to blur together again, but this time it felt different. Before, Clara had been desperately trying to prove she could survive on her own. Now she wasn't alone anymore. Reed came by most days, sometimes to help with work, sometimes just to check in. And Clara found herself looking forward to his visits more than she wanted to admit. They fell into an easy rhythm. Reed would show up around mid-morning, and they'd work together until the afternoon, repairing fences, clearing brush, preparing for winter. Then they'd sit on the porch and drink coffee, talking about nothing and everything. Clara learned that Reed had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he was terrible at remembering to eat regular meals, that he had a scar on his left forearm from a horse kick when he was 15. Small details, insignificant on their own, but together they painted a picture of a man she was starting to care about more than she should. One afternoon, about a week after the attack, Clara was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard a wagon approaching. She looked up to see a woman driving, older and round-faced, with a basket balanced on the seat beside her. The woman pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down with surprising agility. You must be Miss Whitlock. I'm Martha Hendricks. I own the boarding house in town. Clara wiped her hands on her skirt and walked over. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Hendricks. It's Martha, please. The woman's smile was warm and genuine. I heard about what happened here last week. Terrible business. I wanted to come by and bring you something. She retrieved the basket and handed it to Clara. Inside was fresh bread, a jar of preserves, and what looked like a meat pie. Clara felt her throat tighten. You didn't have to do this. I know, but I wanted to. Martha's expression softened. I know what it's like trying to make it on your own out here. My husband died 5 years back, left me with nothing but debts and the boarding house. Folks helped me then, and I figure it's my turn to help someone else. Clara didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded. Martha looked around the property, taking in the repairs, the garden, the new chicken coop. You've done well for yourself. Most city women wouldn't last a month out here, but you've got grit. I respect that. Thank you, Clara managed. If you ever need anything, someone to talk to, a place to stay in town, whatever, you come find me. Women out here got to stick together. After Martha left, Clara sat on the porch with the basket in her lap and cried. Not from sadness, but from the sheer unexpected kindness of it. She'd been so focused on surviving, on proving herself, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of a community. When Reed showed up later that afternoon, Clara told him about Martha's visit. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Martha's good people. She helps everyone. I didn't realize how much I needed that, Clara said quietly. The kindness, I mean. Reed sat down beside her on the porch steps. Out here, kindness isn't just nice, it's survival. Nobody makes it alone. Clara looked at him. Is that why you've been helping me? Survival? Reed was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, At first maybe, but not anymore. Then why? He met her gaze and Clara saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Because somewhere along the way, your survival started mattering more to me than my own. The air between them felt charged, heavy with words unspoken. Clara's heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Reed, he stood abruptly, breaking the moment. I should check on those fence posts we set yesterday. Make sure they're holding. Clara watched him walk away, frustration and something else, something warmer, coiling in her chest. She wanted to call him back, to make him finish what he'd started to say, but she let him go. That night, after Reed had left for his own ranch, Clara sat at the table and tried to sort through her feelings. She'd come here running from one man who wanted to control her. The last thing she needed was to get tangled up with another. But Reed wasn't like that. He never told her what to do, never made her feel small or incapable. He challenged her, pushed her to be stronger, but he never made her feel weak for needing help. And somewhere in the past few months, she'd started to trust him. More than that, she'd started to need him. Not for survival, but for something deeper. The realization terrified her. Winter arrived in earnest a few days later. The temperature dropped, and the first real snow fell. Not the light dusting they'd had before, but heavy, wet flakes that piled up fast. Clara woke to find the world transformed, everything covered in white. She bundled up and went outside to check on the animals. The chickens were huddled in their coop, but they seemed comfortable enough. The garden was buried, the plants dormant until spring. Everything felt quiet, muffled by the snow. Reed arrived mid-morning, riding through the drifts with a pack strapped to his saddle. Brought you some extra firewood. Roads might be impassable for a few days. They unloaded the wood together, stacking it against the house where it would stay dry. Clara's fingers were numb by the time they finished, even through her gloves. "Come inside," she said. "Warm up before you head back." Reed hesitated, then nodded. They stomped the snow off their boots and went inside. Clara made coffee while Reed fed the fire in the stove. The small house warmed quickly, and Clara felt her fingers begin to tingle as feeling returned. They sat at the table, hands wrapped around their cups. Outside, the snow continued to fall. "You ever been through a winter like this before?" Reed asked. Clara shook her head. "Philadelphia gets snow, but nothing like this. How long does it usually last?" "Depends on the year. Could be a few weeks, could be a few months." Reed looked out the window. "You've got enough supplies?" "I think so. Thanks to you forcing me to stock up." "Good." He paused, then said carefully, "If it gets bad, if you run low on anything, you come to my place. Don't try to tough it out on your own. I can manage." "I know you can, but you don't have to." Clara studied him. This man who'd shown up in her life like an answer to a question she hadn't known to ask. "Why do you care so much?" Reed set his cup down slowly. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, "You want the truth?" "Always." He looked at her, really looked at her, and Clara felt pinned in place by the intensity of his gaze. "Because you remind me what it feels like to want something more than just survival. Watching you build this place, fight for it, it made me realize I've been going through the motions for years, just existing, not living." Clara's breath caught. "Reed, I'm not good at this," he continued, the words coming faster now, like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve if he stopped. "Talking about feelings, all that, but you should know that these past few months, helping you, spending time here, it's been the best part of my days, maybe the best part of my year." Clara set her cup down with shaking hands. "I feel the same way." Reed's expression shifted, surprise, then something that looked like hope. "You do?" "Yes. I didn't want to. I came here to be alone, to prove I didn't need anyone, but you—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "You make me want to be braver, stronger, not because I have to be, but because I want to be." Reed stood and moved around the table. He stopped in front of Clara, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I don't have much to offer," he said quietly. "Just a ranch that barely turns a profit and a house that's seen better days. But if you'll have me, I'd like to try. To build something with you. Not just ranches, but a life." Clara's heart felt like it might burst. She stood, closing the distance between them. "I'm not looking for much. Just honesty and partnership. Someone who sees me as an equal." "I do. I always have." Clara reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. "Then yes, I'd like that too." Reed smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his whole face, and then he was kissing her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was afraid she might pull away. But Clara leaned into it, her hands gripping his shirt, and the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Reed rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably go," he said, though he made no move to leave. "Storm's getting worse." "You could stay," Clara said softly. "Just until it passes." Reed pulled back to look at her, searching her face. "You sure?" Clara nodded. She'd never been more sure of anything in her life. The storm raged outside for 3 days. Reed stayed the whole time, and they spent the hours talking, working on small projects around the house, learning each other's rhythms. It felt easy in a way Clara had never experienced before. Natural. On the third night, as they sat by the fire, Reed told her about his mother, how she'd left one morning without warning, just packed a bag and disappeared. "I thought it was my fault for the longest time," he said quietly. "That I wasn't good enough, wasn't what she wanted." Clara took his hand. "It wasn't your fault. Some people just aren't built for this life." "And you? You built for it? For Clara thought about that. A few months ago, she would have said no. But now, sitting in this house she'd repaired with her own hands, on land she'd learned to work, with a man who saw her as an equal, she felt like maybe she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "I'm learning to be," she said. When the storm finally broke, Reed rode back to his own ranch to check on his stock. He promised to return the next day, and Clara found herself counting the hours until he did. Martha visited again a week later, bringing news from town. Tommy had turned witness against Cole, testifying to all the crimes they'd committed. Cole was going to hang, and Tommy was being sent to prison for a shorter sentence. "Town's safer now," Martha said. "And folks are talking about you, Miss Whitlock, about how you stood your ground against those men. They respect that." Clara wasn't sure how she felt about being the subject of town gossip, but the respect was new. It felt good. Martha's eyes twinkled. "They're also talking about how often Reed Callahan's wagon is spotted at your place. Anything you want to share?" Clara felt her cheeks heat. "We're, friends." "Friends." Martha patted her hand. "Well, he's a good man. You could do a lot worse." After Martha left, Clara stood in her yard and looked out over the snow-covered land. Her home. It wasn't perfect. Nothing out here was. But it was hers. And for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She was running toward something, toward a future she was building one hard day at a time. That evening, Reed came by with a proposal. "Spring's still a few months off, but we should start planning. If we combine some of our resources, pool our labor, we could do better than either of us could alone. Maybe run some cattle, expand the crops." Claire considered it. A partnership? In every sense of the word. Reed's expression was serious. "I'm not talking about me taking over your land or you giving up what you've built. I'm talking about building something together, equal partners." Clara felt something settle in her chest, a decision that felt right down to her bones. "Equal partners," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." Reed smiled, and Clara realized she'd do just about anything to see that smile more often. The winter months passed slowly. Clara and Reed spent hours planning, sketching out ideas for the spring planting, debating the merits of different livestock. Some days they argued. Clara had strong opinions and Reed was stubborn, but they always worked it out. By the time the first thaw came in early March, Clara felt like she'd lived a lifetime in this place. The scared woman who'd arrived last summer was gone, replaced by someone harder, stronger, but not harder in a bad way, just more herself. One afternoon, as they were inspecting the fence line, Reed stopped and pointed to the horizon. "See that ridge? That's where my property ends and yours begins." Clara looked at the ridge, then back at Reed. "Seems like a waste, doesn't it? Having a border between us?" Reed's expression was carefully neutral. "What are you suggesting?" Clara took a breath, gathering her courage. "I'm suggesting we stop pretending this is just about ranching. I'm suggesting we make this official, real." "How official are we talking?" "The kind that involves standing in front of the preacher in town and making promises we intend to keep." Reed stared at her for a long moment, and Clara's heart hammered in her chest. Then he laughed, a sound of pure joy, and swept her up in his arms. "Yes. Hell yes." Clara laughed too, dizzy with happiness and relief. "I haven't properly asked yet." "Don't care. The answer's yes." He set her down and kissed her right there in the middle of the muddy field, and Clara thought that maybe this was what happiness felt like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and earned and worth every hardship it had taken to get here. They were married on the first warm day in April, in the small chapel at the edge of Kettleman's Crossing. It wasn't a grand affair, just Martha and a handful of townspeople who'd come to respect Clara's stubborn determination to make something of herself. Deputy Warren stood as witness, and the preacher kept the ceremony short, which suited both Clara and Reed just fine. Clara wore a simple dress she'd borrowed from Martha, pale blue cotton that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. Reed wore his Sunday best, which meant his shirt didn't have any visible holes and his boots were polished. They stood together in front of the preacher, hands clasped, and made promises that felt more real than anything Clara had ever said in her life. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, Reed kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. The small gathering cheered, and Martha cried happy tears into her handkerchief. Afterward, they had a modest celebration at Martha's boarding house. She'd prepared a meal, roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from her own cellar, and there was even a small cake. Clara sat beside Reed at the table, his hand resting on hers, and felt something warm and solid settle in her chest. This was family. Not the one she'd been born into, the one that had turned their backs when she'd chosen her own path. This was the family she'd built from nothing, brick by brick, choice by choice. Martha raised a glass of cider. To Clara and Reed, may your partnership be as strong as your land, and may your love weather every storm. Everyone drank to that, and Clara felt Reed squeeze her hand. They rode back to Clara's ranch, their ranch now, she supposed, as the sun began to set. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the air smelled like spring, like new beginnings and possibilities. We should probably decide whose place we're living in, Reed said as they approached the property. Mine's bigger, but yours has better water access. Clara had been thinking about this. What if we kept both? Used yours for livestock and hay storage, mine for living and crops. We're only a few miles apart. Reed considered it. That could work. We'd be riding back and forth a lot. I don't mind. Do you? No, he smiled. Long as I'm riding back to you, I don't mind at all. They spent their first night as husband and wife in Clara's small house, the one she'd repaired with her own hands. It felt right, somehow. This was where she'd learned to be strong, where she'd discovered who she was when no one was telling her who to be. The next morning, they started the work of merging their lives. It was harder than Clara had anticipated. Not the physical labor, that part was familiar, but the negotiating, the compromise, the learning to make decisions together instead of alone. Reed wanted to plant mostly wheat. Clara thought they should diversify with vegetables they could sell in town. They argued about it for 3 days before finally agreeing to split the land. Wheat on his property, vegetables on hers, with a shared herd of cattle that would rotate between both ranches. You're stubborn as a mule, Reed said, but there was affection in his voice. Takes one to know one. They fell into a new rhythm over the following weeks. Up before dawn, working until their bodies gave out, falling into bed exhausted but satisfied. It wasn't romantic in any traditional sense. They were usually too tired for grand gestures or flowery words, but there was intimacy in the small things. The way Reed brought Clara coffee before she was fully awake. The way Clara mended his shirts without being asked. The comfortable silences that spoke louder than any declaration. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Clara said, "I've been thinking about writing to my mother." Reed glanced at her in surprise. "Yeah? What brought that on?" "I don't know. Maybe I want her to know I'm happy, that I made the right choice." Clara picked at a loose thread on her skirt. "Or maybe I just want her to know I'm alive, that I didn't fall apart like she predicted." "What would you say to her?" Clara thought about it. "That I'm married to a good man, that I own land and work it with my own hands, that I'm stronger than I ever was in her fancy parlor, pretending to be something I wasn't." She paused. "That I forgive her for not understanding, but I don't need her approval anymore." Reed was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sounds like you've got it all figured out. Does it make me petty? Wanting her to know I succeeded without her? Makes you human." Reed reached over and took her hand. "Write the letter, or don't. Either way, you're not doing it for her anymore. You're doing it for you." Clara did write the letter, eventually. It took her 3 tries to get the words right, to strike the balance between honesty and grace. She didn't know if her mother would respond, and she found she didn't particularly care. The act of writing it was enough, a final closing of that chapter of her life. Summer came on strong and hot. The wheat grew tall and golden, the vegetable garden flourished, and the cattle Reed had purchased grazed contentedly on the grassland between the 2 properties. It was hard work, backbreaking, endless work, but it was theirs. Clara learned things she'd never imagined knowing: how to birth a calf when the mother was struggling, how to identify different types of weeds and pull them before they choked out the crops, how to haggle with buyers in town who thought they could lowball her because she was a woman. She also learned she was pregnant. It was Martha who figured it out first, during one of her visits. Clara had been feeling off for weeks, tired beyond reason, queasy in the mornings, but she'd chalked it up to hard work and the summer heat. Martha took one look at her and said, "How far along are you?" Clara blinked. "How far along with what?" "The baby, dear." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I can't be." But even as she said it, Clara was counting backward in her head, and the numbers didn't lie. Martha smiled gently. I'd say about 3 months, give or take. You're going to want to see the doctor in town, get it confirmed. But I've seen enough women in your condition to know the signs. Clara sat down heavily on the porch steps, her mind racing. A baby. She was going to have a baby. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. When Reed came home that evening, Clara was still sitting on the porch, trying to figure out how to tell him. He took one look at her face, and his expression shifted to concern. What's wrong? Are you hurt? No, I'm fine. Clara took a breath. I'm pregnant. Reed froze. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he sat down beside her, slowly, like his legs had forgotten how to hold him up. You're sure? Martha seems to think so. I need to see the doctor, but yes, I think I am. How do you feel about it? Clara appreciated that he asked, that he didn't assume. Scared, excited, overwhelmed, all of it at once. Reed nodded slowly. Yeah, that's about where I'm at too. They sat in silence for a while, both processing. Then Reed said, We can do this. It won't be easy, but we can do it. You sound pretty sure about that. I am. Look at everything we've already done. We built 2 working ranches from nothing. We survived outlaws and winter and your terrible first attempts at cooking. Clara elbowed him. My cooking's gotten better. It has. Mostly. Reed's expression softened. We'll figure it out. Same as we've figured out everything else. Together. Clara leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Together, she repeated. The pregnancy was harder than Clara anticipated. The nausea lasted well into the 4th month, and the fatigue was crushing. But she kept working, because the ranch didn't stop needing attention just because she was growing a human. Reed tried to take on more of the heavy labor, which led to their first real fight as a married couple. I'm pregnant, not helpless, Clara snapped when Reed tried to take the bucket of chicken feed from her hands for the 3rd time that week. I'm just trying to help. I don't need you to help. I need you to trust that I know my own limitations. Reed's jaw tightened. And I need you to trust that I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to make sure you don't hurt yourself or the baby. By treating me like I'm made of glass? By being careful. They glared at each other, both breathing hard. Then Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she hated it, hated that pregnancy had made her emotional and unpredictable. Reed's expression softened immediately. Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to… I'm scared, Clara admitted, the words tumbling out. I'm scared that being pregnant will make me weak again, that I'll turn back into the person I was in Philadelphia, helpless and dependent. Reed pulled her into his arms. That's not going to happen. You're the strongest person I know. Having a baby doesn't change that. What if I'm not a good mother? What if I don't know how? Then we'll figure it out, same as everything else. He pulled back to look at her. But you need to let me help sometimes. Not because you're weak, but because that's what partners do. They help each other. Clara nodded against his chest. I'm sorry I yelled. I'm sorry I hovered. They found a balance after that. Clara kept working, but she was more careful, more willing to ask for help when she needed it. Reed learned to step back and let her do what she was capable of, even when it made him nervous. The harvest that fall was the best either of them had seen. The wheat sold for a good price, the vegetables flew off the stalls at the town market, and they even made a profit on the cattle. For the first time since Clara had arrived in Kettleman's Crossing, money wasn't a constant source of anxiety. They used some of the profit to make improvements. A new roof for Reed's barn, better fencing, a proper root cellar for storing vegetables through the winter. But they also saved, preparing for the baby who would arrive sometime in late winter or early spring. Clara's belly grew round and prominent. She had to stop riding horses in her 7th month, which frustrated her to no end, but she found other ways to stay useful. Mending, planning next year's crops, helping Reed with the bookkeeping that he'd always hated. Winter came again, gentler this time. The snow fell but didn't pile as high as the year before. Clara spent more time indoors, sewing small clothes for the baby and trying not to think about the actual act of giving birth. Martha visited often, bringing supplies and advice. Labor's hard, she said bluntly. Won't lie to you about that. But women have been doing it since the beginning of time, and you're tougher than most. You'll manage. What if something goes wrong? Then we deal with it. The doctor in town's delivered dozens of babies. He knows what he's doing. Martha patted Clara's hand. But you can't spend the next few months worrying about what might happen. You'll drive yourself crazy. Clara tried to take that advice to heart. She focused on the present, the ranch, her marriage, the life growing inside her. Some days it worked. Other days the fear crept back in, whispering that she was in over her head. The baby came on a freezing night in February, 3 weeks earlier than Martha had predicted. Clara's water broke just after midnight, and Reed rode through the dark to fetch both Martha and the doctor. Clara labored through the night and into the next day, gripping the bed frame and cursing every deity she could think of while Martha coached her through the contractions. It was brutal and messy, and nothing like the romanticized version she'd read about in books. At one point, Clara was convinced she was going to die. She told Reed as much through gritted teeth. "You're not dying," he said, holding her hand even though she was crushing his fingers. "You're just mad. There's a difference. I hate you for doing this to me. I know. You can hate me all you want, long as you keep breathing." 17 hours after it started, Clara gave birth to a daughter. The doctor placed the squalling, red-faced infant on Clara's chest, and Clara forgot every second of the pain. She stared down at this tiny, perfect creature she'd made and felt something crack open in her chest. "She's beautiful," Martha said, tears streaming down her face. Reed was crying too, not even trying to hide it. "What should we call her?" Clara looked down at her daughter, their daughter, and said, "Rose, after my grandmother, the only person in my family who ever told me I could be whoever I wanted to be." "Rose Callahan," Reed said softly. "I like it." The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. Rose was a hungry baby, demanding and loud, with a set of lungs that could wake the dead. Clara stumbled through those early days in a fog of exhaustion, learning how to nurse, how to soothe, how to function on 2 hours of sleep. Reed helped as much as he could, walking Rose around the house at night when she wouldn't settle, changing diapers, doing all the chores so Clara could rest. They were both running on fumes, but they were doing it together. One night, about a month after Rose was born, Clara woke to find Reed standing by the window with the baby in his arms. Rose had finally fallen asleep, her tiny fist curled against Reed's chest. Clara watched them from the bed, her heart impossibly full. This man, who'd shown up in her life when she'd needed it most, who'd taught her how to survive and then how to thrive, who now held their daughter like she was made of spun glass. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked softly. Reed turned, careful not to wake Rose. "Just that I never thought I'd have this. A family, someone to build a life with." He looked down at Rose, his expression tender. "Feels like a miracle." "Not a miracle," Clara said. "Just hard work and stubbornness." Reed smiled. "That too." Spring came, and with it, the brutal work of planting season. Clara strapped Rose to her chest in a sling Martha had made and worked in the garden, planting seeds while her daughter dozed against her heart. It wasn't easy, nothing ever was, but it was theirs. The ranch prospered. Word had spread about their successful harvest the previous fall, and other ranchers started coming to Reed for advice. Clara's vegetables became a staple at the town market, and she started getting requests for specific items. They hired help for the first time that summer, a young man named Tom who needed work and didn't mind the hard labor. With the extra hands, Clara and Reed could finally breathe a little easier, could take time to actually enjoy what they'd built instead of just surviving it. On Rose's first birthday, they had a small celebration. Martha came, bringing a cake. A few neighboring ranchers stopped by with small gifts. It was simple and unpretentious, and it was exactly what Clara wanted. As she watched Rose toddle around the yard, chasing chickens and laughing at the sky, Clara thought about how far she'd come. The terrified woman who'd arrived in Kettleman's Crossing 2 years ago barely existed anymore. That version of herself had been scrubbed away by hard work and harder choices, replaced by someone stronger. Not perfect. Clara still had days where she doubted herself, where the fear crept back in, but capable, resilient. Reed came to stand beside her, Rose now in his arms. "What are you thinking about?" "Just that I'm glad I got on that stagecoach." "Even with everything that happened? The gunfight, the outlaws, the backbreaking work?" Clara leaned into him, watching their daughter. "Especially because of all that. I needed to be broken down before I could build myself back up the right way." Reed kissed the top of her head. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you got on that stagecoach too." Years passed. Rose grew from a toddler into a wild, fearless child who could ride a horse before she could write her name. Clara and Reed added to their family, a son named James, then another daughter they called Annie. The ranch expanded, prospered, became one of the most successful operations in the territory. But success didn't come easy, and it didn't come smooth. There were droughts that tested their resilience, years when the harvest failed and money was tight. There were arguments and disagreements, days when Clara and Reed got on each other's nerves so badly they could barely stand to be in the same room. But they always came back to each other. Always remembered that they were partners, equals, building something together that was bigger than either of them alone. Clara never heard back from her mother, though she sent letters occasionally, updating her on the life she'd built. She made peace with that silence, understood that some people would never be able to see past their own limitations to appreciate someone else's growth. What mattered was the family she'd chosen. Reed, who'd stood by her through everything. Martha, who'd become like a mother to her. The community in Kettleman's Crossing that had slowly, grudgingly come to accept and then respect her. On Clara's 40th birthday, she stood on the porch of the house she'd first arrived at 18 years earlier. It had been expanded, improved, reinforced, but the bones were still the same house where she'd spent her first terrified night, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She could see the fields from here, golden with wheat ready for harvest. Could see the barn Reed had rebuilt 5 years ago after a storm took down the old one. Could see her children playing in the yard, Rose teaching James how to rope a fence post while Annie chased the chickens. Reed came out and handed her a cup of coffee, settling into the chair beside her. His hair was graying at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still the same man who'd pulled her off the street that first day, who'd taught her how to survive and then how to live. "You happy?" he asked. Clara thought about it. Was she happy? It wasn't a simple question. Happiness out here wasn't the carefree joy she'd once imagined as a girl in Philadelphia. It was harder, more complicated. It was satisfaction in a job well done, pride in children who were growing up strong and capable, the quiet contentment of sitting beside someone who knew all your flaws and loved you anyway. "Yeah," she said finally, I am. Reed nodded, like that was exactly the answer he'd expected. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, and Clara realized this was what freedom actually looked like. Not the absence of responsibility or hardship, but the ability to choose your own path and walk it on your own terms. She'd come to this place with nothing but a deed to a broken-down ranch and a desperate need to escape. She'd been thrown into fire, tested by violence and winter and her own limitations. But she'd survived. More than that, she'd thrived. The wild hadn't broken her. It had remade her into exactly who she was always meant to be. And that, Clara thought as she took Reed's hand and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of gold, was worth every hard step it had taken to get here. Every blister, every mistake, every moment of doubt and fear. Because on the other side of all that struggle was a life she'd built with her own hands. A life that belonged to her, earned through grit and determination and the stubborn refusal to quit when things got hard. The frontier had tested her and found her worthy. And in return, it had given her everything that mattered. Not wealth or comfort, but purpose. Belonging. Home. Rose came running up to the porch, her face flushed with excitement. "Mama, can we go riding before dinner?" Clara looked at her daughter, strong, confident, fearless in ways Clara had once only dreamed of being, and saw the future. Not just Rose's future, but the future of this land, this life they'd built. "Yeah," Clara said, standing up and taking her daughter's hand. "Let's go riding." Because that was the thing about building a life on your own terms. You didn't get to rest on your accomplishments. You had to keep moving forward, keep choosing it every single day. And Clara had learned that the hard way, through fire and frost and everything in between. But she wouldn't have it any other way.